Alright, so today we are talking about Nixon. Old Nixon in Watergate. So, this is a map of Nixon's first election. It's a lot more tightly contested. He still won by a pretty good amount of votes, but you'll see on the second map that will show up later in the PowerPoint that he wins by a really large majority.
Like 530 points.
He got a whole lot of points, had a good PR. So, the first thing we're going to kind of go over, this is kind of a synopsis of what we're doing today. Kind of going over the Nixon administration. So, the first thing that went on was, after he won in '72, he talked about peace with honor. Now, Mr. Officer, what was Vietnamization? Vietnam War? Come on, we talked about that. What did we say we were going to do with this? Yes?
Vietnamese take control of the country.
Yes! Vietnamese were going to take control of the country. We weren't going to fight the war for them anymore. We also were going to continue to carpet bomb the living heck out of them. And we were going to continue carpet bombing them until the end of the war. However, because of a lot of the issues that Nixon was facing, he had to find out a way out of the war. So we came up with the Paris Peace Agreements. Again, most of this should be reviewed for you guys. Came up with the Paris Peace Agreements. We decided that we were going to have a North and South Vietnam, and then the U.S. was pulling out of it. Now, when we pulled out of it, however, that is when North Vietnam broke those Paris Peace Agreements, and they invaded. A lot of historians nowadays believe that had Nixon not been impeached, the Vietnam War would have not ended the way it did. Because what did Nixon say when we left was going to happen if those peace accords got violated?
We'd come back in full.
We were going to come back in full force, exactly. So we were going to come back in full force. North Vietnam believed that. Then you fast forward, Nixon's going through all this stuff, it's worldwide, and he gets impeached, he resigned, and so North Vietnam says, well, we're going to anyway. So then they invaded South Vietnam, they took Saigon. Good. So, now we're getting to the actual Nixon stuff. So you guys remember what those Pentagon Papers were about? In terms of Vietnam? Pentagon Papers. Kissinger was involved with it. Basically, this was a whole host. It was a 7,000-page document that this dude named Daniel Ellsberg leaked. And what they showed was that the U.S.'s involvement in Vietnam was not quite what the public thought it was. It showed that going all the way back to Truman. So remember, we had Truman, then we went Eisenhower, then we had JFK, and then we had all kinds of presidents. It showed that all the way back in Truman was when we were beginning to get involved seriously in Vietnam, and that a lot of the major reasons why we were over there were not told to the public. So the public was finding out all about these hidden things like the Gulf of Tonkin incident. You know, we had told the public that we were attacked, and that's why we were over there. Then the Pentagon Papers come out and reveal that we weren't attacked, we just made it up. They're actually making a movie about this right now. I think it's called, it's short for Washington Post, so it's WAPO. I think it's WAPO. I don't know how it's WAPO. But they're making a movie about this. And it shed doubt on it, and this was kind of the start of looking into what we were doing in Vietnam. So, pretty important stuff. This is a map of his re-election. So,
I think he won.
yeah, you think he won. Nixon won by an overwhelming majority. So, when we're talking about all this, Nixon was widely loved. Massachusetts, stuck with McGovern. I would probably ballpark, I don't exactly know. I would probably ballpark that's where he's from. It's Massachusetts.
The yellow one.
The yellow one, that's a section of the area where Hospers won. So a third party guy won one vote here.
Better than nothing.
Better than no
That's
votes.
all that happens.
So now, we're on to the juicy stuff. We're talking about Watergate. This is an overview of what happened with Watergate, and then the rest of this PowerPoint we are going to cover the details. So at the time, many were critical of Nixon and his Vietnam policy. Nixon decided to make a list of people he felt were his enemies or enemies to the presidency. This included other politicians, it included actors, and it also included journalists. And part of that was he created a small group of some of his friends, and they were called plumbers, because plumbers stop leaks. And that was the goal. After the Pentagon Papers, he was like, we need to get this stuff under wraps. One of the issues that came up was whether he used campaign funds to pay the plumbers and to pay a lot of the cover-up and hush money stuff. This is one thing that is currently, if you guys have been paying attention to the news, the whole Stormy Daniels incident with President Trump, that's what is being talked about, is not whether he had an affair with her, but rather just where did the money for the hush money come from. That's all the government cares about, is where did the money come from. So these plumbers, it was a small group of 5, and they were at the Watergate, which was a hotel where the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, or that's where they had set up their headquarters, and they were caught there. And the story goes that the first time these plumber guys broke in, they stuck a mop like upside down to kind of hold the door shut, because they didn't have any keys to lock it, but they wanted to hold something shut. And so as they were getting ready to break in, one of the maintenance people was doing their rounds, and they saw this mop, and they were like, well, that's a funny looking mop. So they pulled it out, and so the plumber guys had to wait till another day. They came back in, again, to keep the doors unlocked. They put a little piece of tape over the little mechanism on the door where it clicks in, so that the door couldn't shut. So a security guard was walking by, tried to lock the door, didn't work, tried it again, found the tape, pulled it off, and was like, that's interesting. They come in another time, they do the same exact tape trick, and that time the security guard actually goes, this is fishy, and he calls the cops on them, and they get caught. So if you guys remember that scene from Forrest Gump that we watched yesterday, where he calls up Nixon and he goes, hey, there's a bunch of people in the other building with flashlights and it looks like they're looking for something. So that was the scene. Washington Post broke the story, and you may want to write those 2 dudes down, Woodward and Bernstein. They were the publicists that published the article. They got a whole bunch of flack from it, all kinds of death threats and everything. Yes? They were trying, so what the plumbers were trying to do was dig up information on the enemy, who was the Democratic Party. They were in the Democratic Party's headquarters trying to dig up information on them to then use during the election. So they were in there snooping around and they got caught. After they broke the story, Congress started to hold inquiries, because obviously if dudes are caught in the Democratic National Headquarters snooping around at night, that's a bit of government business. So then Nixon was required to turn over his tapes. He refused. Some of them got destroyed, and then Nixon resigned. Nixon resigned because, for some of you that don't have a job or are looking to be employed, it is better to resign than to be fired. And they were going to take this impeachment all the way to removing him from office, so he just said, I'll just resign anyways. A couple months later, the new President Ford pardoned Nixon, and a lot of people were irritated at that because he gave him a presidential pardon. So now we're going to get in.
Wait, August 74, what happened?
He resigned.
Was when he resigned. Yep. So the Watergate break-in. So again, the Watergate was a hotel where they had established their headquarters at. They were attempting to bug the headquarters so that they could keep collecting information while they were in there snooping around looking for hard information right now. One of the guys that was arrested, James McCord, he was the head of security for the Republican Party. So this was the first step in connecting with Nixon because they had an actual guy that they knew worked for the other party. So why is he in the other parties?
Sabotage.
Hotel room, exactly, sabotaging. But he was connected, and of course since Nixon was part of the Republican Party, they denied all involvement. That's just a picture. You need that, sorry. That's just a picture of the Watergate Hotel and all that stuff. And yeah, a security guard noticed that the exit door had been taped open, and then second time around is when he called the police on him. That's one of the cool little bugs, some chapstick.
Awesome.
That was one of them, super secret. Chapstick, no one ever uses chapstick.
You should just bug the phone line yet.
Well, they needed other things because you're going to check a phone line, right?
That's one.
But you're not going to check your 2 tubes of chapstick, are you?
Check the chairs.
You check chairs and phones, maybe some lights, but not chapstick.
What about the clock?
Well, like under the desk.
Under the desk, but I mean, chapstick underneath your desk would be a strange place to keep chapstick. Point is, they chose chapstick for it, and it worked. These were actual wiretaps that they used, were those chapsticks. These dudes are the 4 plumbers, so you want to write them down. One is Howard Hunt. The 2 most famous ones are Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy. The other guys are James McCord and Chuck Colson. So after the Pentagon Papers got released, the White House created these guys, again, to stop the leaks and to begin to monitor people that could be enemies to the presidency. An example of what one of the things that these guys did was in '71, they burglarized the office of a psychiatrist because they were seeking material to discredit him. And then it was also later revealed, so again connecting with Nixon, that his domestic advisor knew about the plan and approved it. Knew about the plan and approved it. So this was another person directly connecting to Nixon, again whether Nixon himself agreed or disagreed with what was going on, one of his key advisors was in it. Again, that's the election of '72. This is even with the Watergate investigation going on right now. This is still how America voted. So again, America at this point wasn't quite ready to believe in Watergate, but they soon would.
California has a lot of votes.
Yeah, you guys will get into that next year. The amount of votes goes actually off of population. So that's why whenever the election cycles come around and you see like all of this, like this happened this last election, you see like all this and it's like, wow, that's a lot of red. Well, like 15 states equal California. Same with New York, Florida, Texas, and Ohio. Those are referred to usually as the swing states. California pretty much votes blue now. Texas usually votes red. New York votes blue. And so really that's where places like Florida and Ohio are the swing states because they historically have gone either way. And so you know that you're going to swoop up your 4 points from Idaho and Wyoming because they vote pretty red. Washington and Oregon are pretty blue. So basically like a big battle map. But that's what the little numbers are, is those are your electoral votes. That's how much each state is worth. So now we're in the tapes. The old tapes that brought down Nixon. So they began doing hearings in '73, and these were televised. This was one of the first major things televised on regarding politics. Another one that would later come, not necessarily involved with politics, but another really big set of hearings and court cases would be like the O.J. versus the People trial. That was completely televised, and that was widespread across the country. The same were for these Nixon hearings. And the key was whether he knew or did not know about the break-in. So amongst everything, that was the point that they were trying to prove with these hearings, was whether or not he knew, had any knowledge of, or had authorized the plumbers to be going in doing the break-ins. Very similar to some of the investigations going on right now, as it's not necessarily investigating the current administration as to whether or not they colluded with Russia, but more about whether they knew. Because that's the key term, whether they knew what was going on. And if you knew and you tried to cover it up, that's what's called obstruction of justice, which is what the current administration is being investigated for. And strangely enough, that's exactly what happened in this administration. Was Nixon fired people, and then he fired those people, and then he fired those people, and eventually you start firing a bunch of people, and others start raising eyebrows and going, this is interesting. So John Dean delivered a testimony, and he was one of the first people to get the ball rolling, directly connecting Nixon to Watergate and saying that yes, in fact, he knew about it at the very beginning. The administration obviously aimed to discredit Dean. Out of this slide, the main thing you guys need to write down is Alexander Butterfield. And the reason why Mr. Butterfield was such a big deal was he was the guy that came up and told everybody about the tapes. Up until this point in the entire investigation and inquiry, nobody knew about the tapes. And like I mentioned, Nixon was recording conversations, he was recording stuff in the Oval Office, and this guy was the one that had said, hey, if you guys are interested, there's all kinds of tapes all over the White House, and people were like, huh, that's interesting, we didn't know about that. Let's go find those tapes. And these would become the center point of the total investigation.
Done with that.